This is a press freedom broadcast tonight, and of course it's an incredibly important issue for all Australians, and we've just been showing you some of the front pages, and of course we'll get to some of the news that's inside those front pages shortly, but I think it's important and prescient right now to discuss the reasoning behind what the newspapers are doing and why it is so important to Australians, not just to media proprietors. Joining me now is, of course, Des Houghton, former editor of the Courier Mail, former editor of the Sunday Mail, veteran journalist, and, of course, Caleb Bond in Adelaide, who is a youngster who's just coming through the ranks, and he's the local government reporter there in Adelaide. But he will bring very much a younger person's perspective to this debate. Now, let's, guys, go to the main story that accompanies this press freedom campaign by the Right to Know organisation. And the headline is, "There's a lot the government wants to keep hidden from you." A story here by Chuck Miranda. Today, media companies from all over Australia unite in an unprecedented action to fight for press freedoms and the public's right to know what's going on in the country. Australia's Right to Know coalition is more than a dozen of the nation's top media companies and industry organisations campaigning for change to 6 critical areas of law that allow a veil of secrecy to be thrown over matters important to all Australians. Since 2002, there have been 75 pieces of federal legislation intended to protect the public from national security threats, but that have become ways to block the public's right to know what the government is doing. Now, Des, in many respects, some of this legislation is well-intentioned. The problem is that it's basically getting caught in the net, journalists and their ability to do their job properly.
Yes, Peter, it's a serious blight on our democracy. And, of course, the free press is at the very foundation of a healthy democracy, and our key job of exposing wrongdoing is compromised every time, and the public lose out. That said, Peter, I do get a little bit squeamish when I see the media take the moral high ground in this way. I think Peter Dutton and the Prime Minister were right when they said no one is above the law, and that does include journalists. And, you know, my first thought, and I know other people think, you know, journalists are running around with plenty to say tonight, but who elected them? They are there purely as servants of the people, in many ways like politicians, and their rights and responsibilities are very tenuously weighted against you know, a greater good. The Smethurst story was an absolute cracker, and you know, it exposed a secret cabinet document from the Signals Directorate, which, believe it or not, Peter, is one of 9 spy agencies, one of 9 agencies in this country that can actually spy on you. And if I was the Prime Minister and I had a top secret document like that, I too would want to know how the hell it ended up on the front page of all the Sunday papers.
But Desi, come on.
In the News Limited group.
Isn't that the point? Doesn't the public deserve to know that the government wants greater powers to spy on them? Isn't that in the public interest? I mean, you're right, and it does so. However, I have to think of it from the Prime Minister's point of view and from a national security position. The Signals Directorate wanted those extra powers because there were, as I understand it, there were 8 or 9 terrorists whose movements and phones and emails they wanted to surveil because they were plotting to do things like blow up buildings. Now, you know, it's all very well and good to say, oh, we can expose that, but at the same time, the national security teams have their job to do as well. That said, and I'll argue against myself here, there's no doubt that you know, these laws are a blight and a big restriction on free press. On the other hand, if we have too much free press, there's a very real threat that we will compromise national security. You know,
how do journalists think they're above the law?
No, I don't think we do. I think
these laws they want an exemption, as Campbell Reid said. They want immunity from certain criminal acts. No one else gets those immunities.
But hang on, Des, the problem here is that they've introduced these laws and they have now, that the net has shrunk, if you like, and those 75 laws now bring journalists into the frame. It shouldn't be a crime to do your job, Des. And Des, you've broken some of the biggest stories Queensland has ever seen. If you were restricted from doing that and a politician had the ability, or a judge had the ability to throw you into jail for doing your job, I think you'd have a very, very different approach to this. Caleb, as a young journalist, are you concerned at the prospect of one day being thrown into jail for simply doing your job?
Of course I am. Because every day when I come to work, all I want to do is tell my readers what is going on in their community. I want to tell them what is going on in Adelaide, and more broadly, I want to tell them what is going on in Australia. Now, Annika Smethurst simply reported information that was given to her by someone within the government. The fact that she reported that information should not be a crime. The fact, perhaps, that someone gave her that information. Now, if the government wants to deal with someone for leaking internal information, that's their business. But the fact that Annika Smethurst simply reported information that happened to fall into her lap, that was given to her, that was in the public interest, should not ever be a crime. I mean, we have laws in South Australia that if there is an issue that comes before the ICAC, the Independent Commission Against Corruption, I mean, we cannot even talk about something that comes before ICAC. And if I report on an issue, if I mention in a story an issue that relates to ICAC, ICAC is well within its rights to come into my office, into the newsroom, to request any documents that I have relating to that issue. And if I don't hand over those documents, I can be sent to prison. And that is quite simply an affront to press freedom. I mean, I don't come to work wanting to break the law, and I don't think any journalist goes to work wanting to break the law. We simply want to inform readers, we want to inform viewers or listeners about what is going on in their state, in their country, in their city. And I don't think people take this responsibility lightly. I mean, we want to tell them about things that seriously matter to them. And if there are things that should not be revealed because there is a serious reason for them to not be revealed, we won't do it. But we know when people need to know the truth. And when the law stands in the way of that, we need to stand up for that.
I don't disagree with any of that, and I think you put that very eloquently. In my own state of Queensland, of course, we're forbidden by law to publish who goes into the Crime Commission's Star Chamber here to give evidence and what it's about. And I got a suspicion journalists have been put in that Star Chamber.
I know they have, Des.
Have they?
Yes.
I know they've been put in there, and we're unable to report on that. So censorship is deep and it's broad. There are other issues here too. The Signals Directorate, which has powerful tools of surveillance, is just one of many organisations that can and probably do routinely spy on journalists. I don't think journalists know this, but I know the AFP in its annual report says it collected journalists' metadata 58 times. But there are other organisations that don't have to tell you. So they probably already tap your phones and read your emails.
Sure they do.
And these include, these are the ones with powers: ASIO, ACIS, the Office of National Intelligence, the Signals Directorate that we've discussed, the Defence Intelligence Unit, the Australian Crime Commission, and Peter Dutton's Home Affairs has an intelligence part too to thwart terrorism. And there's even AUSTRAC, that follows the money trails.
And Desi, we don't have a problem with the power that those particular organisations exert when it comes to getting baddies, terrorists. But when journalists are trying to do their job, and as I say, shine a little bit of sunlight on a dark place, they shouldn't have the authority to stop you from doing their job. It's a fundamental tenet of our society that journalists are able to do great investigative journalism.
Do you have the right to stop them doing their job?
No,
I'm arguing against myself because
you're taking a very contrary view. But I think it's important. Let's just hear what Michael Miller has had to say in tomorrow's papers. You should always be suspicious. Michael Miller, of course, is the Executive Chairman and CEO of News Corp. You should always be suspicious of governments increasingly wanting to restrict your right to know. Democracy is about public accountability. We must never accept modern-day Australia is enhanced by governments being more secretive and hiding from scrutiny. This is something worth all of us fighting, Caleb.
Absolutely. And I think it goes beyond. I mean, we can sit here and talk as journalists about our right as journalists. But as you outlined in your opening to this program, Peter, it's not about journalists. I mean, I don't go to work in the morning and go, OK, well, I'm a journalist today, and what can I do as a journalist? I go to work in the morning and say, what can I give to my readers? And ultimately, what we do as a job, whether it's on Sky News or whether it's in a newspaper or whether it's on a radio station, is to give people information that they ought to know. And when the law stands in the way of us providing information that they ought to know, we need to stand against that. And it's not about us wanting to reveal information that we shouldn't reveal. It's about us wanting to tell Australian people things that matter to their lives and that affect them. And in the Annika Smethurst case, I mean, you know, the government wanting to monitor you in your daily life, of course, is something that you ought to know. And when the government wants to keep things secret, it is absolutely right that we question why they want to keep those things secret. I mean, as a cause and effect argument, why would you keep something secret if there was no reason to keep it secret? Surely, if you're keeping something secret, you don't want people to know about it.
My concern is that we are going to have sources, and I mean, I mentioned Watergate, I mentioned Bjelke-Petersen and the Fitzgerald inquiry. My concern is we're going to have sources who are so scared at the prospect of being caught in this all-encompassing web that they will not be providing information for the better good of society. Des, the law, let's have a look here. The law, the warrant was issued in the Smethurst case under Section 79(3) of the Crimes Act 1914. They used a 105-year-old statute to go through her house. They rifled through her underpants. Outrageous, Des Houghton.
It doesn't make it a bad law just because it's an old law. But I hear what you're saying. Now, I don't think this was. You know, there's one aspect of this too. This was a leak of a cabinet document to a journalist for the sole purpose of trying to embarrass Peter Dutton, is my understanding of it. I might be wrong, but that's the way I read it. It had nothing to do with the high moral ground of whether or not people's liberties would be infringed by spies eavesdropping on their conversations. And they were doing that, I think, to try and get people who, if you read the ASIO report, there were attacks planned on government buildings. So while I would have run the story too, and here I'm being a hypocrite, I think it was a great story. I think we as journalists have to occasionally look at the other side.
All right, we're going to head to a break very, very shortly, but I want to give both of you about 60 seconds each just to tell us what your thoughts are. Caleb, your thoughts on this campaign and how important it is. I'm glad we've got a contrary view in many respects from Des, who has raised some very legitimate issues. But from my perspective, and clearly from your perspective, Caleb, this is not only the right thing to do, but it's important that Australians understand it. And I think right now, Australians just don't understand how important this is. Tomorrow will be a pivotal watershed moment in Australian journalism history.
Correct. And I'm glad that the major news corporations in this country are prosecuting this campaign. And I understand where Des is coming from, that yes, there is a responsibility for us as journalists to interpret the news that we deliver to people, but it's not Annika Smethurst's fault that someone gave her a cabinet document. That cabinet document happened to be in the public interest, and it would be remiss of her as a journalist not to report that. And when the government steps in and essentially tries to criminalise the journalist for reporting information that has been given to him or her, that is a problem. You may well criminalise the person who provides confidential document to a journalist. I understand that. But when you criminalise the journalist for reporting that information that has been provided to them, improperly or otherwise, that is the issue. A journalist, first and foremost, has to give information to their readers. That's their job, and that should never, ever be criminalised.
Des, the final word.
I agree. Don't get me wrong, I agree with the campaign wholeheartedly, and I'm just thinking of the creeping censorship, as Campbell put it. I thought he did it very well. You know, all of us have had freedom of information searches, and we get back pages that are just completely blacked out. So, you know, there's censorship at both state and federal level, and that is abhorrent, and it stops us doing our job, and it stops us serving our communities.